There's a section of Archive 7 that I avoid visiting, not because it's more dangerous than the others, though it certainly is, but because it's personal. Because 8 years ago, I lost my son Tommy in that section, and 3 days ago, I discovered something that changes everything I thought I knew about his death. My name is Mr. Keeper. Welcome to the most disturbing wing of Archive 7. The children's section houses objects that specifically target minors. Not randomly, not accidentally, but with a precision that suggests these entities understand something about childhood innocence that we don't. They feed on it, manipulate it, consume it in ways that defy every natural law we think we understand. Today I'm going to show you 3 objects that have destroyed dozens of families over the past century. Objects that don't just harm children, they harvest them. And I'm going to tell you about my son Tommy, who I thought was dead until I heard his voice 3 nights ago, calling to me from inside one of these objects. What you're about to see will disturb you. It should disturb you, because these aren't just paranormal artifacts, they're predators. And they're very, very good at what they do. But before we begin, I need you to understand something. The children these objects take, they don't die. Not exactly. They go somewhere else. Somewhere we can't follow. Somewhere we can't save them from. And that might be worse than death. Object 0892. Isabella's doll. This porcelain-faced Victorian doll belonged to the Morrison family of Edinburgh, 1923. She has blonde ringlets, a blue silk dress, and eyes that follow you around the room. But Isabella's most disturbing characteristic isn't her appearance, it's her tears. The doll cries real tears, not condensation, not some mechanical mechanism, but actual salt water that flows from her porcelain cheeks. And she only cries for one reason. A child is going to disappear within 48 hours. The first documented case occurred on November 15th, 1923. 7-year-old Margaret Morrison was playing with the doll in her nursery when her mother heard something impossible. The sound of sobbing coming from the toy. When Mrs. Morrison investigated, she found the doll's face wet with tears, though the child insisted she hadn't done anything to cause it. Margaret Morrison vanished 2 days later while walking home from school. She was found 6 months later in a cottage 20 miles from Edinburgh, alive but changed. She couldn't remember the 6 months she'd been missing. She couldn't explain how she'd survived or who had cared for her. And most disturbing of all, she had aged only 2 weeks during the 6 months she was gone. But the doll had stopped crying the moment Margaret was found. Over the next decade, the Morrison family documented 17 separate incidents. The doll would cry, and within 48 hours, a child would disappear. Sometimes it was a Morrison child, sometimes a neighborhood child, sometimes a child the family had never even met. But the pattern never varied. Tears today, disappearance tomorrow. The children were always found eventually weeks, months, sometimes years later. They were always alive, always physically unharmed, but always changed in ways that doctors couldn't explain. They aged more slowly while missing. They forgot how to speak their native language, but could recite poems in languages that didn't exist. They drew pictures of places that had never been built and people who had never been born. Dr. Margaret Chun. Yes, our missing Dr. Chun, before she joined Archive 7, studied this doll extensively in the 1990s. Her research notes, which I've been reviewing since her disappearance, contain a theory that terrified even her. She believed the doll wasn't predicting disappearances. It was announcing harvests. Chin's theory suggested that Isabella's doll was connected to some kind of collection network, that the tears weren't warnings, but signals. The doll would identify vulnerable children, mark them somehow, and then other entities would collect them for purposes we couldn't understand. What happened to the children during their disappearances? Chen found patterns in their post-recovery behavior that suggested they had been taken to a place outside normal time and space. A place where they were studied, cataloged, and eventually returned as specimens, living proof of whatever experiments had been conducted on them. The Morrison family donated the doll to government authorities in 1934 after their youngest daughter, Emma, disappeared for 8 months and returned speaking only in mathematical equations. The doll has been in government custody ever since, and it has never stopped crying. In fact, over the past 70 years, the frequency of her tears has increased dramatically. She cries almost daily now, and child disappearances in London have risen by 300% since 1952, the year Archive 7 was established. But 3 days ago, something changed. For the first time in decades, Isabella stopped crying altogether. Her face is completely dry, her expression peaceful, and I can't help but wonder, has she stopped because there are no more children to harvest? Or because the harvest is complete? Object 0473. Timothy's teddy bear. This brown plush bear belonged to 8-year-old Timothy Hartwell of Manchester, 1967. When Timothy received the bear as a birthday gift, it was 12 inches tall, a normal size for a child's toy. Today, 47 years later, it stands nearly 4 feet tall and continues to grow. The bear grows by feeding on childhood memories. Not just any memories, specifically the warm, happy, innocent memories that define a child's sense of safety and love. Each memory it consumes adds to its physical mass, making it larger, heavier, more substantial. And with each memory it takes, the child loses a piece of their childhood forever. Timothy Hartwell was a normal, happy 8-year-old when he received the bear. His parents described him as imaginative, affectionate, constantly laughing. But within weeks of receiving the toy, Timothy began to change. He became withdrawn, serious, old beyond his years. He stopped playing with other toys, stopped laughing at jokes, stopped believing in Father Christmas or fairy tales. His parents initially attributed this to normal maturation. Children do grow up, after all, but then they noticed something impossible. The teddy bear was getting bigger. Not gradually, not in ways that could be explained by stuffing, settling, or fabric stretching. It was actually growing, adding mass and height in ways that defied physical laws. More disturbing were the sounds. Timothy's mother reported hearing conversations coming from his room at night. Timothy's voice and another voice, deeper and older, speaking in whispers. When she investigated, she would find Timothy alone with the bear, but the child could never explain who he had been talking to. The conversations were always about memories. The voice would ask Timothy to remember specific moments. His first day of school, Christmas morning, summer holidays with his grandparents. And as Timothy recounted these memories in detail, his parents noticed that his recollection of them began to fade. Events that had once filled him with joy became vague, distant, eventually disappearing entirely from his conscious mind. Dr. Hartwell, Timothy's father was a physician, began keeping detailed records of his son's psychological changes and the bear's physical growth. His notes, which are part of our archive, show a direct correlation. As Timothy lost his childhood memories, the bear gained mass. For every happy memory that vanished from Timothy's mind, the bear grew approximately half an inch taller. The process took 18 months. By Timothy's 10th birthday, he had no memory of ever being a child. He couldn't remember learning to walk. His first words, Christmas mornings, bedtime stories, playing with friends. He had the emotional capacity of an adult, but the life experience of someone who had never truly lived. The bear, meanwhile, had grown to over 3 feet tall and required its own chair at the dinner table. Timothy's parents tried everything. They consulted child psychologists, neurologists, even priests. No one could explain how a child could lose 18 months of memories while retaining all his factual knowledge and practical skills. No one could explain how a stuffed toy could grow like a living creature. In desperation, Dr. Hartwell decided to remove the bear from his son's room. The moment he touched it, something extraordinary happened. For just an instant, he could hear them. Dozens of children's voices, all speaking at once, all coming from inside the bear. They were recounting memories, birthday parties, family holidays, moments of pure childhood joy. But the voices were flat, mechanical, as if the children were reading from scripts rather than reliving experiences. Dr. Hartwell realized the horrifying truth. The bear wasn't just taking Timothy's memories. It was collecting memories from multiple children, storing them inside its growing mass like a library of stolen childhood experiences. Government authorities removed the bear from the Hartwell home in 1969 after Timothy, now 11 years old but emotionally 40, requested that his parents surrender it to prevent it from harming other children. Timothy Hartwell grew up to become a successful accountant, married, had children of his own, but he never regained his childhood memories. He never experienced nostalgia, never felt the warm comfort of remembering simpler times. He lived his entire adult life as someone who had never truly been a child. The bear has been an archive, 7 since 1969, and it has never stopped growing. More disturbing, we've documented cases of children worldwide losing memories in patterns identical to Timothy's experience. Children who wake up one day unable to remember their happiest moments, unable to recall the feelings that once brought them comfort and joy. But the most terrifying discovery came 8 years ago when I brought my son Tommy to work during a school holiday. I know it was against protocol, but Tommy was 8 years old, curious about his father's job, and I thought a brief, supervised visit to the safer sections might satisfy his questions about why Daddy worked in such a secret place. Tommy was fascinated by the bear. He stood in front of its containment unit for nearly an hour, asking questions about how it had grown so large, why it was kept behind glass, whether it was lonely. I answered carefully, not wanting to frighten him, but trying to satisfy his curiosity. When we left that day, Tommy seemed fine, but over the following weeks, I noticed changes. Small at first, he stopped asking for bedtime stories, stopped playing with his favorite toys, stopped laughing at cartoons that had once delighted him. I told myself it was normal development, that all children eventually outgrow childish pleasures. But then I noticed something that chilled me to the bone. Tommy had started talking about the bear. Not just mentioning it, but having conversations about it. He would tell me things about the bear that I had never shared with him. Its history, its previous owners, details from classified files that an 8-year-old shouldn't know. When I asked how he knew these things, Tommy would look confused and say the bear had told him. During dreams, he said, the bear would visit him in his sleep and tell him stories about all the other children it had known. 6 months after our visit to Archive 7, Tommy disappeared from his bedroom in the middle of the night. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle, no indication of how he had left the house. He simply vanished. I tore London apart looking for him. I used every resource at my disposal, called in favors from every intelligence agency in Europe, spent my life savings on private investigators. For 8 years, I found nothing. Not a trace, not a clue, not even a credible sighting. But 3 nights ago, something impossible happened. I was working late in Archive 7, conducting routine inspections of the containment units, when I heard something that stopped my heart. A child's voice calling my name. Daddy? I followed the sound to the children's section to Timothy's teddy bear. The voice was coming from inside the bear, and it was Tommy's voice. Daddy, I'm here. I'm inside with all the other children. We're safe, Daddy, but we can't come home. The bear keeps us safe, but it needs us to stay. I tried to respond, tried to ask questions, tried to understand what had happened to my son. But the voice faded, and I was left alone with a growing teddy bear that now measures 4 feet, 2 inches tall. Tommy didn't disappear 8 years ago. He was collected, he was harvested, and he's been inside that bear ever since, along with dozens of other children whose memories now fuel its impossible growth. Object 1205, the Willowbrook Park Swing. This cast iron swing was removed from Willowbrook Children's Park in Sussex in 1956, after 17 children disappeared over a period of 3 years. The swing has one characteristic that defies explanation. It moves by itself in perfect rhythm, as if an invisible child were using it. But the swing doesn't just move randomly. It swings with purpose, with intention. It calls to lonely children, drawing them to parks and playgrounds where they will be most vulnerable. And once a child sits on the swing, they never want to get off. The first documented case occurred in 1953 when 9-year-old Sarah Collins was found by her parents at Willowbrook Park at 3 in the morning. Sarah had been missing for 6 hours. When her parents found her, she was sitting on the swing, pumping her legs mechanically, staring straight ahead with unfocused eyes. Sarah couldn't explain how she had gotten to the park. She couldn't remember leaving her house, walking the 2 miles to Willowbrook, or deciding to play on the swing in the middle of the night. She only remembered the voice, a child's voice calling her name, telling her that she was needed at the park, that other children were waiting for her. But when Sarah's parents tried to take her home, she resisted violently. She screamed that she couldn't leave, that the other children would be sad, that she had to keep swinging or something terrible would happen. It took 3 adults to physically remove her from the swing, and she cried for hours afterward, begging to be taken back to the park. Over the next 3 years, 16 more children were found in identical circumstances. Always at night, always on the swing, always in the same trance-like state, and always reluctant to leave, as if the swing had some kind of hold over them that was broken only by physical removal. The children who were rescued from the swing were never quite the same afterward. They became obsessed with returning to the park, with finding other children who needed to swing. They would draw pictures of playground equipment that didn't exist, sing songs in languages that had never been spoken, and speak constantly about invisible friends who lived inside the swing. Local authorities initially attributed the incidents to sleepwalking or some form of mass hysteria. But then children started disappearing permanently. The pattern was always the same. A child would be found on the swing in the middle of the night, would be taken home by worried parents, and would vanish from their bedroom within a week. 7 children disappeared permanently before authorities decided to remove the swing from Willowbrook Park. But removing the swing didn't solve the problem. It made it worse. Children from surrounding areas began disappearing from their own local playgrounds, always from swings, always at night, always after claiming they had heard voices calling them to play. The swing was acquired by government authorities in 1956 and has been in secure storage ever since. But even in containment, it continues to move. Gentle, rhythmic movements that suggest an invisible child is using it. Security cameras show the swing moving for hours at a time, always in perfect rhythm, always with the same hypnotic pattern. More disturbing are the sounds. Audio recordings from the swing's containment unit pick up children's voices singing playground songs, laughing, calling out to each other. But the voices are always just quiet enough that individual words can't be distinguished. Just loud enough to be heard, just soft enough to be maddening. Dr. Chin's research suggested that the swing was a collection point, a kind of portal that transported children to wherever the other objects kept their victims. She theorized that the swing, the teddy bear, and Isabella's doll were all connected, all working together to harvest children for some greater purpose. Her final notes on the swing contain a discovery that explains why child disappearances have accelerated since 1952. Chun found evidence that the swing doesn't just call to individual children, it calls to playground equipment itself. Swings, slides, and merry-go-rounds around the world have begun exhibiting similar behavior, moving by themselves, calling to children, creating a global network of collection points. But the most terrifying part of Chin's research was her discovery of what she called the Willowbrook Protocol. Hidden in declassified government documents, she found evidence that Archive 7 wasn't built to contain the swing. It was built because the swing requested it. The swing had somehow communicated with government officials in 1952, requesting a secure facility where it and similar objects could be stored safely. Not to protect the world from them, but to protect them from the world while they completed whatever work they were doing. Archive 7 wasn't built to imprison these objects. It was built to serve them, and we've been serving them ever since, bringing them new specimens, new victims, new children to add to their collection. 3 days ago, when I heard Tommy's voice coming from the teddy bear, I noticed something else. The swing had stopped moving. For the first time since 1956, it was completely still, and I realized why. They don't need to call the children anymore. They have enough. The collection is complete. Whatever these objects have been working toward for the past 70 years, they've achieved it. And I think I know what's coming next. The children's section isn't just the most disturbing wing of Archive 7, it's the most important. Because these objects don't just harm children randomly. They're building something. creating something, and they've been using our children as raw materials. Dr. Chen's final research notes contain a timeline that shows child disappearances worldwide increasing exponentially since 1952. Not just in areas where these objects are active, but everywhere. As if the entire global population of children is being evaluated, sorted, selected. Tommy isn't dead. None of the missing children are dead. They're somewhere else, in some kind of storage dimension where they're being preserved until they're needed. But needed for what? I think I know. 3 days ago, when Tommy spoke to me from inside the teddy bear, he said something that I initially dismissed as the confusion of a frightened child. He said, "Daddy, we're getting ready. The grown-ups are almost ready too. Soon we can all be together in the new place." The new place, not our world, not the dimension where these objects store the children. Somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that requires both children and adults, both innocence and experience, both the harvested memories and the people who created those memories. I think Archive 7 was never about containing dangerous objects. I think it was about preparing us, training us to accept the impossible, to work alongside supernatural entities, to serve purposes we don't understand. We've been conditioned over 70 years to follow orders, to study objects we can't comprehend, to accept that there are forces beyond our control. And now I think the conditioning is complete. We're ready. The children are ready. The objects have what they need from both groups. Dr. Chun discovered this before she disappeared. That's why she left that note. We're not the guardians. We're the collection. We've been collected just as surely as the children have been collected. We just haven't been transported yet. But I think that's about to change. The children's objects have gone quiet. Isabella has stopped crying. The teddy bear has stopped growing. The swing has stopped moving. After decades of constant activity, they've suddenly become dormant. And I don't think it's because they're resting. I think it's because they're waiting. Next episode, if there's a next episode, I'll show you what happens when objects don't just collect humans, but begin to replace them. When a line between the artificial and the real disappears entirely. But I'm running out of time. The facility feels different now. The other staff members move like sleepwalkers. The objects seem to be watching us more intently. And sometimes, late at night, I can hear Tommy's voice calling to me from the children's section. "Daddy, it's time. Come join us in the new place." I don't know how much longer I can resist that call. I don't know how much longer any of us can resist. If you're watching this, remember what I've told you. Remember that some collections, once complete, become something else entirely. And remember that the most dangerous prisons are the ones where the prisoners don't realize they're in prison. Welcome to Archive 7. We've been expecting you.